From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Mire, la gente está en las calles.
Look, people are in the streets. There are a million people in the streets. There are takeovers, there are checkpoints, there are demonstrations. People are also being killed, assassinated by the repressive apparatuses of the state. There is a massive protest of society because of the lack of transparency in the electoral system.
The political crisis continues in Honduras as the government's still refusing to release the results of the November 26 presidential election that pit U.S.-backed President Juan Orlando Hernandez against opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah. Massive protests erupted after the government-controlled Electoral Commission stopped tallying votes when the count showed Nasrallah ahead. We'll speak with former Honduran President Manuel Zelaya, who was ousted in a 2009 U.S.-backed coup. He now heads the opposition Libre Party, part of the coalition Alliance Against the Dictatorship.
There's no democracy here. There's no rule of law here. We are suffering repression here. People are being persecuted. There are human rights violations. Every day. There's no due process. There's nothing. Since the coup d'etat, the United States has done what it wants with this country. They changed all the laws.
President Zelaya in a Democracy Now! Exclusive. Then the dangerous case of Donald Trump. Psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. We'll speak with forensic psychiatrist Dr. Brandy Lee, organizer of the Yale Duty to Warn Conference. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In California, nearly 200,000 people have been forced to evacuate as drought-fueled wildfires tear across Southern California. Climate experts say the intensity of the winter blazes is linked to climate change. The fires caused the intermittent shutdown of the 101 and 405 freeways. Nearly 150,000 acres have been scorched so far by fires. Authorities have warned residents to stay inside because of the dangerous air quality caused by smoke and cancerous ash from the fires. But a number of farms have stayed open, sparking concerns farm workers are laboring in hazardous conditions without proper equipment. On Wednesday, volunteers handing out free protective masks to farm workers say they were kicked off some farms despite the fact the pickers were asking for the safety equipment. Tens of thousands of Palestinians protested in the West Bank and Gaza Strip following President Trump's announcement he's recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and initiating a process of moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Dozens of Palestinians were injured as Israeli soldiers cracked down on the protests. At least 16 protesters were hospitalized. Control of Jerusalem is one of the most contested issues between Israelis and Palestinians. The Israeli military seized control of East Jerusalem in 1967 and has occupied the territory ever since. Palestinians, however, have long seen East Jerusalem as the capital of their future country. The UN Security Council is meeting today to discuss President Trump's announcement. A top Palestinian official, Jibril Rajoub, has now said Vice President Mike Pence is not welcome to visit the Palestinian city of Bethlehem in the West Bank during Pence's scheduled visit later this month. Democratic Senator Al Franken of Minnesota is resigning after being accused by at least 7 women of groping them or forcibly trying to kiss them without their consent.
Today, I am announcing that in the coming weeks, I will be resigning as a member of the United States Senate. I, of all people, am aware that there is some irony in the fact that I am leaving while a man who has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party. But this decision is not about me. It's about the people of Minnesota.
Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton is expected to appoint Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith to replace Senator Franken until a new election. Republican Arizona Congressman Trent Franks has announced he's also resigning after learning the Congressional Ethics Committee is investigating him for sexual harassment. Multiple female staff members say Franks asked them if they would give birth to his children because he and his wife were having trouble conceiving. Franks is one of the most conservative members of Congress, part of Republicans' far-right-wing Freedom Caucus. Meanwhile, Republican Utah Congressmember Mia Love is calling on her fellow Republican Congressmember Blake Farenthold of Texas to resign, following revelations he paid $84,000 of taxpayer money in 2014 sexual harassment settlement with his former communications director, Lauren Green. Former USA Gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar has been sentenced to 60 years in prison for possessing tens of thousands of images of child pornography, including images of infants. Nassar has also admitted to sexually assaulting women and children and is awaiting sentencing in 2 separate trials. Dozens of female athletes, including members of the U.S. Olympic gymnastics team, have accused him of penetrating their vaginas with his fingers and covering up the abuse by pretending it was part of a medical treatment. In Alabama, a number of African-American lawmakers are planning to campaign for Democratic Senate candidate Doug Jones, who's running against Republican candidate Roy Moore in the contentious December 12th special Senate election. Among those who are planning to campaign with Jones this weekend are New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, Alabama Congressmember Terry Sewell, Georgia Congressmember John Lewis, and former Massachusetts Democratic Governor Deval Patrick. Jones is in a close race against Roy Moore, who's been accused by at least 9 women of sexually harassing or assaulting them when they were teenagers, one as young as 14. Moore's been repeatedly endorsed by President Trump, who is holding a rally today in Pensacola, just 4 days before the special election. Pensacola is just 20 miles from the Alabama border, and it's in the same media market as Mobile, Alabama. Yes, again, President Trump will be in Pensacola this afternoon. White former police officer Michael Slager has been sentenced to 20 years in prison for murdering unarmed black motorist Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. Video footage shows Scott was unarmed and running away from Officer Slager when Slager opened fire, shooting Scott 8 times in the back, killing him. The video was captured by a bystander. An investigation by the Center for Investigative Journalism in Puerto Rico has revealed nearly 1,000 more people died in the 40-day period after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico compared to that same period last year. These findings sharply contradict the September 20th storm's official death toll of 62. Meanwhile, nearly 90% of schools have reopened across Puerto Rico following protests and political pressure from parents. But parents whose children attend the schools that still remain closed are concerned they may never be reopened and that the storm may be used to further privatize education.
My name is Kelvin Coffey. I'm a father of a child with autism. And we are here right now at the Department of Public Education of Puerto Rico to see if we can resolve the issue with the school that my kid goes, that has been closed, and right now we don't have an answer why it has been closed, even though it didn't have any structural damage.
Protesters flooded the streets Thursday for a national day of action protesting the Federal Communications Commission plan to dismantle landmark regulations that ensure equal access to the Internet. Protesters demanded the net neutrality rules stay in place at more than 100 rallies coast to coast, including here in Manhattan.
My name is Ellen Skorka. I'm from Manhattan, and I'm fighting for net neutrality, which will be voted on next week. And if the FCC gets their way, they will have more control over the Internet. It will cost everyone more, and the only one who benefits will be big business. It will hurt small businesses. It will hurt individuals. And once again, the Trump administration is helping the top 1% and the corporations and hurting everybody else.
Two African-American Democratic Congress members, John Lewis of Georgia and Benny Thompson of Mississippi, say they will not attend the opening of a new civil rights museum in Jackson, Mississippi, in protest of President Trump's planned attendance on Saturday. In a joint statement, the lawmakers said, quote, President Trump's disparaging comments about the women, disabled, immigrants, and National Football League players disrespect the efforts of Fannie Lou Hamer, Aaron Henry, Medgar Evers, Robert Clark, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and countless others who've given their all for Mississippi to be a better place, unquote. Congress members John Lewis and Bernie Thompson wrote that statement. In New York City, hundreds of people rallied outside the Brooklyn courthouse Thursday to demand courtrooms prohibit undercover immigration agents from arresting people at or in the vicinity of courthouses.
My name is Luis Mancheno, and I am an immigration attorney at the Bronx Defenders, and I am also a member of the 5 Borough Defenders here in New York City. I'm here today because I'm joining all the public defenders here in our city to demand that our city courts and our courts in our state are free from the presence of ICE. Because what's happening right now is that during this year, ICE has been arresting in really, really high numbers a lot of the clients that we represent in court. And the fact is that the immigrant community here in New York no longer has the trust that they need to have in order to be able to access justice in court.
In California, advertisers are pulling their business with the award-winning alternative newspaper, the LA Weekly, after it was bought by a shadowy group of male investors who fired every editor and all but one writer on staff last week. The LA Weekly is a long-running left-leaning newspaper in Los Angeles, but the new owners, who refused to even reveal themselves at the time of the mass firing, are conservative investors based in Orange County, some of whom have donated heavily to the Republican Party. And football player Colin Kaepernick accepted the Puffin Nation Prize for Creative Citizenship Tuesday night for having sparked a movement against racism and police brutality across the NFL and beyond after refusing to stand for the national anthem before NFL games.
I also like to say at this point in time, with freedom of speech and freedom of press being under attack in so many ways, in so many forms, the Nation Institute and the work that journalists and reporters are doing right now is more important than it ever has been. You truly are the pathway for the people to see the truth that's going on. So in this moment of time, my message to all of you is continue to speak just in an unjust room. Regardless of the consequences, regardless of the backlash, we're with you. We need that truth, and continue to spread that truth for us, because people need to know what's truly going on so we can game plan as far as how to fight against these oppressive forces.
That's football player Colin Kaepernick being honored at the Nation Institute Gala. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Honduras, the political crisis continues as the government's still refusing to release the results of the November 26 presidential election, held almost 2 weeks ago. The election pits U.S.-backed President Juan Orlando Hernandez against opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah, head of the National Alliance Against the Dictatorship. Massive protests erupted over the weekend after the government-controlled Electoral Commission stopped tallying votes when the count showed Nasrallah ahead of Hernandez by more than 5 percentage points. After the delay, the Electoral Commission then claimed Hernandez was ahead, sparking protests in which as many as 11 people were killed and more than 1,200 detained. Earlier this week, the Honduran police mutinied against the government, saying they would no longer enforce a curfew and crack down against protesters. Well, on Wednesday, in a Democracy Now! Exclusive, I spoke with President Manuel Zelaya. He was president of Honduras from 2006 to 2009 before he was ousted in a U.S.-backed coup on June 28, 2009. He's now head of the opposition Libre Party, part of the coalition of the Alliance Against the Dictatorship, which is led by the opposition presidential candidate Salvador Nasrallah. We spoke via Democracy Now! Video stream. President Zelaya was in Tegucigalpa. I began by asking him to describe the situation in Honduras right now.
Look, people are in the streets. There are 1 million people in the streets. There are takeovers, there are checkpoints, there are demonstrations. People are also being killed, assassinated by the repressive apparatuses of the state. There is a massive protest of society because of the lack of transparency in the electoral system. Today, we are calling our candidate, who is now president-elect, we are calling for a count of all polling places. There are only 18,000 polling places. It's not such a large number. That can be done in a matter of 4 days so that the people can regain calm. Because based on the data that the state itself put out, the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, the Alliance of Opposition Against the Dictatorship, on the day of the election, the tribunal said that we had a 5% lead with 71% of the votes counted. They said with 57% counted, the alliance already had a 5% advantage, and then with 71% counted, the 5% trend was maintained. 71%. It was a 5% lead and growing. Now then, the system went down for 3 days. They say that the server was overloaded. That's like putting 3 needles into a room. How is a server going to be overloaded with so little data? The server can take billions and billions of pieces of data. So 3 days, it was the vote count was stopped, and then there was a change in service in the server, and we were told that they had reset when we asked for the backup, and it was all lost. And then it was resumed, and we're told with 29% of the vote left to be counted that we were losing, and so people were indignant, felt bothered, and we resent the fact that the United States has this duplicitous discourse with respect to Honduras. They control the country. I was the president. They control the media, the private enterprise, the churches, the military, and they are silent. It's very striking that there's a twofold discourse, a duplicitous discourse here on the part of the State Department.
President Zelaya, what are you calling for right now?
At this time, we're asking for 2 things. First, for people to stay firm and stay in the streets, because if we don't defend what we've won at the polls in the streets, the Honduran institutions have been co-opted from the coup d'etat to date. There's no democracy here. There's no rule of law here. We are suffering repression here. People are being persecuted. There are human rights violations every day. There's no due process. There's nothing. Since the coup d'etat, the United States has done what it wants with this country. They changed all the laws. This is a military state with laws like Plan Colombia, like the laws in Iraq and Afghanistan. That is what's happening in Honduras, and they've done away with guarantees and with respect. What's being done in this country is unjust. We are calling for people to defend themselves in the streets, so that what we won at the polls, we defend in the streets. And second, the little bit of institutional framework that the state has. Well, the OAS is calling for this, the European Union. Let's count the 18,000 polling places. They say let's count, or let's review the reports on the votes. But that's manipulated. Let's actually look at the votes. Let's see where the voters signed, and let's see if the signatures on the reports of the votes coincide with what's on the actual vote. We're asking for something fair. This is very sensitive demand, and we think that the international community should support democracy in Honduras. We want peace in Honduras.
Are you calling for a full recount or a new election?
No para que se cuenten los votos. Queremos que se cuenten los votos.
We know that Salvador Nasrallah won the election. Salvador Nasrallah, in a matter of 6 months, we had an alliance with the Libre Party, which was founded after the coup d'etat. We entered into an alliance with him. He's practically a TV personality and sports journalist, and in a matter of 6 months, with happiness, dancing in all of the towns, with music, he won the elections. We won. We defeated 130 years of bipartisan rule in Honduras. We defeated them. The people defeated them because of the poverty, the misery, and the violence. The people cannot put up with it anymore. So the elections were won. They recognized it the day of the elections. It was in the press worldwide that the alliance had won the election. And today, silence. Let's hear the voice of the church, the voice of the military. Will they react only when the United States gives them the order?
President Zelaya, the U.S. State Department certified the Honduran government has been fighting corruption and supporting human rights, clearing the way for Honduras to receive millions of dollars in U.S. aid. This came just a few days after the election took place on November 26th, in the midst of the dispute. Can you talk about the significance of this?
Well, 1 month ago, the United Nations organization in Geneva that looks out for human rights involved Honduras and put it directly on the list of countries that violate human rights. Just 1 year ago, they assassinated Berta Cáceres, a defender of nature, a defender of the rivers. They went to assassinate her, and the indicia indicate that the masterminds of this crime are being protected by the state. Nonetheless, the State Department comes out with these things. The State Department is a very political organization. They protect the dictators who are their friends. Nonetheless, in Honduras, it has been clear, well, in the last 6 months, there's not been an ambassador of the United States. The ambassador of the United States is like a governor. It's like a state that is under the dollar. And we find it shameful that the State Department is so indifferent to the Honduran people who are suffering. There have been 12 assassinations in the last 48 hours. We're under a state of siege. You know, they've declared a state of siege against the protests. They are counting the votes under a state of siege with a military, highly repressive state in Honduras.
What is the United States doing behind the scenes, President Zelaya?
They want to leave the dictator in, endorsing a fraud, endorsing a dictator.
How do you know that? What is it doing to ensure that?
The Organization of American States put out a report yesterday, which is mostly satisfactory, about how the operational side of the elections are being held. And the OAS, well, this is a report that it must be analyzed with the State Department as well, and they say clearly that the OAS cannot consider the results of the put out by the election tribunal to be reliable. They're saying that the current president is being illegally reelected. They've violated the Constitution. They've assaulted the institutions of the state. They carried out a fraud. They did not want to carry out the national election census. And now, since they were not able to win at the ballot box, they're now manipulating the system, the count system. The OAS already put out a report that we find very satisfactory. Based on that report, today we will be presenting challenges to the election. We will be calling for a general count of all the votes. Now, if the State Department would like to rectify its position, it should go along with us in this, that there should be a count. If the current president won, what's the problem in having a recount? If they say he won, well, Mr. President, let's have a count. You in the United States, let us look. Let's have a count in Europe. Let's have a count. What's the problem? If the electoral tribunal says that you won, well, they're all employees of the presidency. Let's have a public count in front of cameras and television and international organizations. The three parties that participated, the main parties, let's be there. And they say everything is transparent. I would hope it would be. And I would hope that that can happen in coming hours.
That's former Honduran President Manuel Zelaya, ousted in 2009 in a U.S.-backed coup. We'll be back with our exclusive interview with him, and then we'll talk about the dangerous case of Donald Trump, psychiatrists and mental health experts assessing a president. Stay with us.
De 1.000 millones de personas en el mundo que viven al día con $1 y más de 1.000 millones de otros cuantos que por tanto nunca comen suficiente. 3/4 partes del dinero del planeta se lo lleva el 10% de la gente y cada día se preguntan dónde explotará la próxima bomba nuclear. La mayoría de esos pobres en el mundo son mujeres discriminadas y maltratadas. Muchos de sus hijos, de sus hijas, mueren enfermos antes.
Honduran band Café Guancasco, one of the most politically outspoken bands in Honduras. After the 2009 U.S.-backed coup, they became known as the Band of the Resistance. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. As we return to Democracy Now!'s exclusive interview with the former Honduran President Manuel Zelaya, ousted in the 2009 U.S.-backed coup. The political crisis in Honduras today is continuing as the government still refuses to release the results of the November 26 presidential election that pit the U.S.-backed president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, against the opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah, head of the Alliance Against the Dictatorship. Massive protests erupted over the weekend after the government-controlled Electoral Commission stopped tallying votes when the count showed Nasrallah ahead of Hernandez. I asked President Zelaya whether he's suggesting the U.S. is still running the show right now in Honduras.
De eso yo no tengo ninguna duda.
I have no doubt about it, Amy.
¿Sabe por qué? Porque yo ya fui presidente del país.
And you know why? Because I was president of the country. And they tried to run everything, and their opposition is what took me out of power.
Contra mí se planificó en Miami, en el Comando Sur.
The coup d'etat against me was planned in Miami at the Southern Command. So I know here they run the churches. Not all of them, not all of the pastors or all of the priests, but the main heads. They finance the main churches, evangelical churches as well. Not all of them, but most of them.
Manejan los grandes propietarios de las corporaciones de medios de comunicación.
They run the large owners of the media corporations. They feed them a line day after day.
Solo a ellos les obedecen porque ellos los forman, ellos los educan en la escuela.
And the military obey them because they were trained by them at the School of the Americas. It now has another name, but the graduates are throughout Latin America. The private business, well, if you're going to be a business person and make money in Honduras, you need to export to the United States, and so you have to have a good relationship, you have to have a visa. So anything the United States says is the law for the private sector here. If they say go into the abysm, they will. That's how the history of this country has been. They run the transnationals, private sector, the churches, the major media, not just here, around the world. The major media conglomerates answer to the U.S. line. And that is why it's necessary for them to reflect upon the harm that they're doing to a small country like this. It's incredible. But they're not going to be able to govern. If Juan Orlando is imposed in the next 4 years, they're not going to be able to govern. The people will be in the streets. Everyone is shouting, fuera Jo, which means out Jose Orlando Hernandez, the president.
Has the United States reached out to Salvador Nasrallah? Has he been speaking to the U.S. government?
Sí, bastante.
Yes, quite a bit. They have been meeting with them, but they want Salvador to sign an agreement with the president to review only some of the vote reports. They're asking him to sign that. Salvador has refused because he knows that it's a trap that they're trying to lead him into. They want just a partial review, and that is obviously not enough.
And what does Nasrallah say to that? What's his response?
La respuesta es la misma que le estoy dando yo. Esto lo hemos hablado con él.
The answer is the same that I'm giving you. I've spoken with him, work in coordination. I'm the coordinator of the alliance. He is the candidate and the president-elect. The answer is, let's have a general count, and let's have the people in the streets.
Can you talk about General Kelly? General Kelly, who is this White House Chief of Staff right now, formerly head of Southcom, certainly involved with matters relating to the United States and Honduras. Do you see him playing a role in the Honduran election?
Bueno, salúdeme al general Kelly. Él vino varias veces.
Please extend my greetings to General Kelly. He came here several times. I did not meet him personally, but I know who he is. When he was the head of the Southern Command, head of Southcom,
Se le dio la responsabilidad sobre Honduras.
he was given responsibility over Honduras, and he exercised a great deal of influence in the changes in the country. And President Obama said it's a mistake to put the military in charge of drug trafficking because their armed forces are going to become contaminated. Well, here General Kelly made that mistake of getting the armed forces involved. Instead of involved in defense, they're involved in security. That's a big mistake because the military have a patriotic function to defend and support security, but not to be the first line on security. And so he is in large measure responsible for the tragedy that the country is experiencing.
Do you see a difference between the Trump administration's involvement in Honduras today and the Obama administration clearly involved in the coup against you that toppled you, President Zelaya, in 2009?
Menos hipocresía con Trump, no más directo.
There's less hypocrisy with Trump. He's more direct about what he's going to do, and he does it. Under the previous administration, there was a lack of sincerity in the words. And so, in a way, we like this, but Trump is very repressive. He's very cold and harsh. He only sees the world from the standpoint of business. I think that we, human beings, in the eyes of God and the eyes of the law, have the same value. This is what Jefferson said. It's what Washington said. It's what the U.S. Constitution says. He lacks humanity.
Do you see a connection between the coup against you in 2009 and the violence that has grown in Honduras, leading up to, for example, the assassination of Berta Cáceres in 2015?
Este mundo es una aldea global. Está todo.
The world is a global village. Everything is interrelated. You were here after the coup d'etat, and you experienced that tragedy in Honduras. Since then, those who carried out the coup and removed me have been governing. I organized the people, and we've now defeated them. At the polls, in a civic manner, without violence, we defeated them. They have the weapons and all. And of course, they changed the state. They turned it into a military, repressive state, violator of human rights. And there's no more respect for due process. They've introduced new laws. There's a law on secrecy, for example. I had a law called Law for Access to Public Information and Law for Transparency, and a law on citizen participation. Now, these are prohibited. Popular consultations are provided by this tyrannical government. They say there can be elections, but the elections are not the essence of democracy. Elections are, you presented a piece of paper with a bunch of photos and you mark it. That is not the full extent of democracy. And people making decisions is democracy, and it's not accepted here now, almost 10 years after the coup d'etat. There is a tie-in of death squads, people are being massacred, killed in series. We hadn't seen that before in this country. That is a result of the state instead of seeking to be democratic, well, it simply centralized power and made it authoritarian and military. In addition, as indicated in State Department reports, the amount of drugs coming through Honduras has tripled. Of course, now there's directly military control of all movement of the country, and so it's easier for the drug traffickers than in an open democratic system. Now there is too much control by the security forces, and therefore the drugs go through very openly through Honduras. Of course, all of that has been the result of the control that the United States came to acquire after the coup d'etat. First, remember, Otto Reich came through with accusations against Honduras and so forth. But even so, we won the elections. Roberto Carmona, a Venezuelan CIA agent, came through. The United States took possession of Honduras after the coup d'etat, and they've done a very bad job running the country. The economy has been low. The poverty has grown. Violence has grown. Let me cite one data. Violence went down in the 6 months leading up to the elections. Well, that was clearly an indicator that those who are running the violence and control those who are producing the violence are those who reduce the levels of violence. Why? Because there's elections. And then after the elections, the violence will come back. They're the ones who are running it. It's like a Plan Colombia for Honduras. That is what we have called it.
Are you for the passage of the Berta Cáceres Human Rights Act in the U.S. Congress that would cut off military aid to Honduras until human rights violations stop?
Yes, I agree with passage of the Berta Cáceres Human Rights Act because the United States is financing a repressive state violating human rights, and we need to have an in-depth investigation into all of it.
The former Bolivian president, Jorge Quiroga, is heading the Organization of American States, the OAS election observation mission in Honduras. He said the tight margin, along with the irregularities, errors, and systematic problems that have surrounded this election, does not allow the mission to be certain about the results. President Zelaya, what's your response to the former Bolivian president?
Look, Tuto Quiroga, as we know him in Latin America, is a man from the far right. He's a peon of the CIA. He works with them. He informs them. He was vice president of a dictator in Bolivia. In Bolivia, he appears to be critical of the system and of Evo Morales. Here, he has come to defend a dictator. So I don't believe him. A traitor once, a traitor forever.
In the Wall Street Journal, there was an opinion piece that said that you are doing the bidding of Venezuela, President Zelaya. It's also what the PR firms in Washington that represent the Honduran right are trying to say. What is your response to them?
I didn't know the Venezuelans until I became president of Honduras, and I met Hugo Chavez. My record as a citizen is well known throughout my entire life in Honduras. I am a democratic-minded man. I am a pacifist. I don't use weapons. Plus, I have a clean record throughout my life, my private life, my public life, my administrative life. No one can have any doubts about me. Now, in terms of my thinking and my ideology and my ways of thinking, I share directly with all people struggling for justice. Venezuela, the people of Bolivar, the people of Central America, of Morazan, the people of Cuba, Martí and Artigas in Ecuador, the people of Mexico, the people of Farabundo Martí, the Sandinistas, all have struggled against dictatorships, opprobrious dictatorships for centuries. So that is consistent with my way of being. I defend the Bolivarian Revolution and the revolution of Martí and Morazán here, and the revolutions in the African countries and the Middle East who are putting up with so much pressure by the empire. I am the defender of just causes, and I identify with that. Now, if because of that they say that I have some affinity with the people, tell them it's true. It's true. The struggle being carried out by Nicolás Maduro to defend his natural resources that the United States wants to recover, oil, the oil wells, and the European countries, companies as well, is a just struggle of the Venezuelan people, and I am with Nicolás Maduro in that struggle because the actions carried out by the United States against Venezuela are public. The Obama decrees against Venezuela, declaring it to be an enemy of the world, is public. The aggression by Trump saying he's going to invade Venezuela is public. We Latin Americans and Caribbeans, Hispanic Americans who are here, just as we defend immigrants in the United States, we also defend peoples who fight for change. Here in Honduras, I began a process of change, and they took us out by bullets. And it was the Latin American left that defended me. At that time, the right united, but as a matter of hypocrisy, because within months they were with those who carried out the coups here, so they don't want changes in Latin America, the Caribbean, or anywhere in the world. Not even in the United States do they want changes. There was a candidate proposing democratic socialism, and similarly, we have a proposal along the same lines at the opposition alliance. So the United States is denying reality. They might stop changes momentarily, but changes of humankind cannot be stopped. We continue going forward despite all of the forces that historically try to keep things as they are. Humankind has gone through all sorts of change, war, revolution, peaceful demonstrations like Gandhi, as Jesus Christ taught us, and we're involved in that process. So my identification with those causes is a matter of public record. I come from a right-wing party, but in exercising power at the top level of the public life of any human being, holding power, we realized we needed to help the workers, the campesinos, the teachers. I wanted this country to have relations with the world. I brought Lula, I brought Chavez, I brought President Bachelet, presidents of Mexico. I maintained good relations with the United States. You might not believe me, but they had a center with Chavez. They wanted to destroy Chavez because he wanted to free these peoples from the oppression of the big transnationals, the military and the transnationals. It's the U.S. and European military-industrial complex. With that, they've gone to destroy the Middle East. We have anti-imperialist principles and anti-capitalist principles because capital is good. Capital needs to be developed. Private enterprise plays a fundamental role in the history of our peoples. The private sector. I myself own agricultural businesses and so on. But capital was created by man, and it's not possible that now capital is dominating human beings. Here they want to run the nations, they want to run the states, they want to oppress and exploit the peoples. I'm a business person, but the role of a business person is to drive the economy, but not to guide the nation. The nation should be guided by common sense and reason, and that is democracy. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. I see this is not coming from the coup d'etat. We are resisting with force, so we will maintain this position the rest of our lives, and we see that the people are the ones who are on the right side of history. The people is like the concept of God. The people is justice. The people is transparency. The people is calling for justice, demanding justice. So if they want to judge me or criticize me for these views, they may do so.
Would you say that Salvador Nasrallah shares your views?
Gran parte de ellos.
In large measure. Salvador is a fair man. He is a man of the right, but he is a fair man. And we entered into an alliance, and we signed this, and we said we're going for a participatory democracy because representative democracy is a betrayal. It represents betrayal of the people who need to be involved in referendums and in popular consultations. We consider him to be an advanced and progressive man. He's not a socialist, but he is a progressive man, and that's why he was our candidate. And that's why we won the election. The people were able to pick up on his message.
President Zelaya, the significance of the police refusing to enforce the curfew for President Hernandez.
There was a mutiny in the Cobra group, was a special commando group, a rebellion, and that then spread to all of the civilian police. There was like 24 hours of rebellion. Logically, these are disciplined bodies that have their esprit de corps, and they defend their own integrity at the end of the day. But it sends two messages to the nation. You are governing poorly, we want clean elections, and we want the winner to be recognized as the winner. We don't want impositions, we're not going to accept impositions, and we're not going to obey the president when he orders us to lash out against the people. They are our sisters and brothers. And they said, we are not going to repress the people. The people demand transparent elections and a transparent vote count, and it was won. And the police are now have stepped back. They reached a specific agreement, but they really left a revolutionary message with the people. It's a group that is with the people, and we have confidence, and we're grateful for this historic gesture on the part of the police. Unlike the military are the ones who are killing us, they're the ones who are assassinating, and they should reflect upon this because they too are persons of the people.
And finally, what do you see happening from this point on, President Zelaya?
Pregúntele ahí al General Kelly.
Ask General Kelly. I already told you what we are going to do, and we're going to uphold the will of the people. I've told you what Salvador Nasrallah is doing. We're calling on the people to defend themselves in the streets, to take to the streets. If they do not defend their triumph, what we don't defend in the streets, we're not going to be able to defend in the institutions which are totally co-opted and controlled by the tyranny that has been established in Honduras and with the support of the State Department. And the State Department, to conclude, I ask you, look, you in the United States, you have a major responsibility in the world. You have the money, the weapons, power in the world. You have the technology, some of the greatest strides in science. Don't do this to this people. Stop supporting a fraud in Honduras. Please allow us to act democratically. We're a peaceful people, and we want to have a good relationship with the United States. But in this way, all that is done is for the United States to get a poor image, worse than it already might be.
That's former Honduras President Manuel Zelaya, who was ousted in a 2009 U.S.-backed coup. He was speaking to us from Tegucigalpa, Honduras. He heads the opposition Libre Party, part of the Alliance Against the Dictatorship, which is led by Salvador Nasrallah, the opposition presidential candidate. The Honduran government-controlled election commission still refuses to release the final results from the election nearly 2 weeks ago. You can go to DemocracyNow.org to see all of our coverage of Honduras, including our coverage of his return to Honduras in 2011 on a plane from Nicaragua. This was after he was deposed and then returning to Honduras after the U.S.-backed coup. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we'll be talking about the dangerous case of Donald Trump. Psychiatrists and mental health experts assessing a president. Stay with us.
Señor presidente, le vengo a avisar, no tengo papeles para trabajar. Presidente, pregunto por qué matan al moreno con piel de café. Ah, ah, ah. Yeah. Ah. Si fuera presidente honestamente, si fuera presidente, para mi gente, si fuera presidente, honestamente, presidente, para mi gente.
If I Was President by the LA-based band Las Cafeteras, performing here in our Democracy Now! Studios. To see the full interview and their performances, you can go to democracynow.org. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show with growing questions about President Donald Trump's mental health. On Wednesday, Trump slurred his speech and mispronounced words during an address on Israel.
Let us rethink old assumptions and open our hearts and minds to possible and possibilities. And finally, I ask the leaders of the region, political and religious, Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Christian and Muslim, to join us in the noble quest for lasting peace. Thank you. God bless you. God bless Israel. God bless the Palestinians, and God bless the United States. Thank you very much.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders responded to questions about Trump's slurred speech by announcing he's scheduled a physical health exam.
The president's throat was dry, nothing more than that. He does have a physical scheduled for the first part of next year. The full physical that most presidents go through, that'll take place at Walter Reed, and those records will be released by the doctor following that taking place.
This comes as New York Times chief White House reporter Maggie Haberman commented on Trump's behavior when she was interviewed on CNN last week.
Something is unleashed with him lately. I don't know what is causing it. I don't know how to describe it.
You see a difference in the past, what, days, weeks?
I think the last couple of days' tweets have been
unhinged,
markedly accelerated in terms of seeming a little unmoored.
Last month, Pentagon leaders told a Senate panel they would ignore any unlawful order by the president to launch a nuclear strike. The testimony came as part of the first congressional hearings in more than 40 years on the president's authority to start a nuclear war. This is Connecticut Democrat Chris Murphy raised some of these questions. But for more, we're joined by someone who has led a discussion of mental health professionals who are concerned about President Trump's psychological instability. Dr. Bandy Lee is a forensic psychiatrist on the faculty of Yale School of Medicine, an internationally recognized expert on violence. She edited the book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. The book became a bestseller when it was published in October. It sold out over and over again. Dr. Bandy Lee, welcome to Democracy Now! What are your concerns, and are they increasing?
Well, we have been concerned about the mental stability of the president as well as his dangerousness since pretty much since his campaign, but heightened since his election. And I have been flooded with phone calls and emails, messages since the morning after election. Much of my profession had been silenced because of what is called the Goldwater rule. It basically states that psychiatrists are not to diagnose a public figure without having examined them personally and gotten consent. But interestingly, the American Psychiatric Association modified its own interpretation of the rule in March of this year to basically say that psychiatrists are not allowed to say anything about their speech or behavior, even in an emergency. And I felt that that actually went against the ethical principles of our profession. And so I held a conference in April to discuss the ethical rules and invited Robert J. Lifton as well as a number of other renowned members of my field. And only about 20 people showed up to a large auditorium. Basically, they were afraid. They were afraid of being targeted litigiously by the president or physically by his violence-prone followers. But when the news got out and in the national and international news, hundreds of mental health professionals got in touch with me, and now we're in the thousands.
So the movement is called the Duty to Warn movement, your conference, the Duty to Warn conference. What does that mean, duty to warn?
That is actually based on, the phrase comes from a California case, which has been litigated hundreds of times compared to the Goldwater case, which was only litigated once. But our profession in general has a duty to report, a duty to warn, and a duty to take steps to protect potential victims in the case of danger. We as mental health professionals routinely screen for a risk and are involved in preventing violence as well as intervening with collaboration with security forces generally. And so when we have information that would cause us to suspect danger, we do have an obligation to intervene.
So you've just back from Capitol Hill. You're urging lawmakers, Democrat and Republican, to call for an urgent mental evaluation of Donald Trump.
Yes, because usually when there's a sign of danger, it's an emergency. So what we do is we contain the person, remove them from access to weapons, and do an urgent evaluation. This is what we have been urging for with regard to the president. He has shown a number of signs showing proneness to violence. He has incited violence in the past. He's shown an attraction to violence as a coping strategy of his own. He's taunted hostile nations with nuclear power. Basically, the risk in our minds is quite high.
Now, I wanted to ask you, there are those who are really questioning the Duty to Warn movement. There's the disability blogger who said bigotry is not a mental illness. There was a piece that was done by Noah Feldman, Stop Using Language of Mental Health to Criticize President Trump. And if you can respond to some of this criticism.
Actually, we're often confused with a non-professional group called Duty to Warn. We are actually a national coalition of mental health professionals who believe in the duty to warn as a principle of our profession, because we have an obligation not just to our individual patients but also to the public. And
Richard Friedman wrote in an op-ed piece in the New York Times, there's one last reason we should avoid psychiatrically labeling our leaders. It lets them off the moral hook. Not all misbehavior reflects psychopathology. The fact is that ordinary human meanness and incompetence are far more common than mental illness. We should not be in the business of medicalizing bad actors. Your response, Dr. Lay.
Well, mental impairment is not mutually exclusive with criminal responsibility. In fact, only about 1% of murder cases are deemed not guilty by reason of insanity. What we're saying is actually that the combination of mental disability, instability, and criminal mindedness actually makes one more dangerous. So we're basically just warning about danger. We're not making diagnoses. We're calling for an evaluation. I hear that Mr. Trump is undergoing a physical exam in January. I hope it includes a screen for mental capacity, the capacity to serve, the basic ability to take in correct information and advice when needed, to process that information, to make sound, logical decisions based on facts and real consequences.
As we wrap up, how does this relate to the issue of impeachment?
In my mind, well, that's really not my area. My expertise is in medicine and psychiatry and violence prevention. But when I met with the lawmakers, it seemed that while the 25th Amendment would be the only area that deals with presidential disability, even that is a political decision. In other words, in courts or for legal bodies, we give our expert opinion based on medical data, but all we do is give recommendations. The disability or unfitness for duty, these things are still legal decisions in all circumstances. It seems in this case it would be a political decision whereby it can play a role.
We're going to do part 2 of this discussion and put it in our web exclusives at democracynow.org. Dr. Bandy Lee, forensic psychiatrist, internationally recognized expert on violence, editor of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. She is an organizer of the Yale University Duty to Warn Conference at the Yale Medical School. Happy birthday, Carla Wills. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Goddess-Diener, Sam Malkoff, John Hamilton. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.